Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really disruptive, honestly fascinating piece by Vivify Mariposa. It's called The Bandaid President Who Made the Machine Smile.
Right, and what Mariposa does here is perform a totally uncompromising investigative autopsy on this myth of 1990s prosperity. The golden rule for her piece is no filter, just facts, and we're absolutely bringing that exact same energy to our debate today. We're looking at a pretty provocative thesis, that Bill Clinton was the president who managed to take massive institutional damage and make it look, well, modern, charming, and totally reasonable.
Mariposa hits us right out of the gate with this quote. The 1990s felt prosperous because the bill had not arrived yet. Which, forces us to ask, why did so many people buy into that smile?
Because the financial extraction happening behind the scenes was disguised beautifully. I mean, think about it. You mix undeniable charm, youth, a little late-night saxophone playing, and suddenly the true long-term costs get silently pushed off onto future workers, students, homeowners, immigrants, and literally no one sounds the alarm.
All right, Section 1. Selling the smile. Progress as a product.
So, we have to talk about the branding. There was this whole myth built around third-way empathy language. The brand was all about being the ultimate champion for working people. But you look past the brand, and the reality was the Democratic Leadership Council. Clinton became chairman of the DLC back in 1990. And if you look at their corporate donors, you're seeing pharmaceutical companies, defense contractors, Enron, Philip Morris. So what actually happened? Corporate interests basically moved right into the party's living room to write policy. They just wore progressive, empathetic language while quietly building an architecture of concentrated wealth.
Section 2. Deregulation and fake prosperity. The math is the receipt.
Okay, let's track Robert Rubin's timeline here, because the conflicts of interest are just glaring. In 1995, as Treasury Secretary, Rubin is actively pushing to repeal the Glass-Steagall Act. Fast forward to 1998, Citicorp and Travelers Group merge, which actually required a temporary waiver. Then, in 1999, Clinton officially signs the repeal, retroactively making that merger legal.
And the receipt for all that hard work? Just months later, Rubin joins the newly formed Citigroup, where he pockets $126 million over the next decade. And the kicker? When the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission questioned him later, he used the phrase, "I don't remember," 41 times. This wasn't some subtle revolving door, you guys. This was the machine openly collecting its payout.
And then we hit this absolutely staggering number, $29 trillion. That was the size of the completely unregulated derivatives market in the late 90s.
Yeah, and Brooksley Born, who was chair of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission at the time, she totally saw the danger. She tried to warn the administration in 1998, but Rubin, along with Alan Greenspan and Larry Summers, completely silenced her. Born ended up resigning, and Clinton signed the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. And guess what? Those exact unregulated instruments were the ones that detonated the global economy in 2008.
But wait, what about the famous Clinton surplus? We hear about that all the time.
Right. Well, it was basically an illusion stacked on top of three simultaneous corporate bubbles. You had the dot-com bubble, which generated all these phantom capital gains taxes right before wiping out $5 trillion in value. Then there was the telecom bubble, where $600 billion was borrowed for unused networks after the '96 Telecommunications Act. And don't forget the Y2K bubble, which was just $134 billion in artificially pulled forward demand. Oh, and to top it all off, that surplus was heavily padded by borrowing against Social Security funds that were meant for future retirees.
Let's move to Section 3. Trade and debt traps. The Main Street illusion.
Here we have the massive political promise of NAFTA. It was aggressively pitched to the public as the key to creating good-paying American jobs. But the receipts tell a completely different story. The Bureau of Labor Statistics logged a loss of over 4.5 million manufacturing jobs. Combine that with China entering the WTO, and you're looking at 60,000 factories shutting down. And contrary to the sales pitch, these towns didn't just magically pivot to a knowledge economy. They were gutted. They emptied out, which paved the way for the opioid epidemic and created this massive supply chain dependency that completely crushed us during the COVID pandemic.
So what exactly did the administration sell as progress that ultimately became a trap? Housing, for sure. Mariposa actually shares this crazy personal story of sitting in a mortgage seminar back in 1997. Clinton's HUD had engineered this hyper-aggressive strategy to mandate record home ownership. Suddenly, down payments dropped to zero. Lenders started pushing these ninja loans, no income, no job, no assets, while hiding variable rates. Why? Because they knew Wall Street would just eagerly buy up the risk. Mariposa sat there, realized the math completely did not add up, and walked away. The people who stayed and bought into that system, they lost everything in 2008. And we see that exact same trap set in higher education. Just look at the explosion in federal student loan debt. We go from $187 billion in 1995 to a suffocating $1.75 trillion by 2024.
Exactly. And the mechanics of why this happened are undeniable. The 1993 direct lending expansion essentially handed universities a blank check to double their tuition. And then 1998 legislation comes along and eliminates bankruptcy discharge for student loans. So almost overnight, higher education morphed from being the ladder of opportunity into a permanent financial chain around students' necks.
Section 4. Punishing the most vulnerable, the punitive state.
It makes you wonder, why is political outrage so incredibly selective today, especially when you see later presidents using the exact same punitive tools that Bill Clinton happily signed into law? Well, it goes back to the branding. The administration wrapped itself in the language of empathy, while simultaneously delivering a devastating triple blow to minority communities. Think about it. The 1994 crime bill expanded prisons and locked in mandatory minimums. While that's happening, NAFTA is busy offshoring the very manufacturing jobs those specific communities relied on. And as a final punch, the 1996 welfare reform slaps strict work limits on households that had literally just lost their primary earners and their local factories. It was brutal.
And then we get to the immigration law that so many people conveniently pretend started much later, the 1996 Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act.
Right. This law ruthlessly expanded expedited removals. It skyrocketed deportations from 50,000 to over 200,000 a year. It added permanent bars, 10-year bars for reentry, and it completely stripped judicial discretion out of the process. The massive enforcement machinery that sparks so much outrage today, that was built, signed, and openly celebrated back in 1996.
Mariposa actually recounts a harrowing personal encounter with this very system. Immigration officers literally came into her home while her family was inside. They were searching for someone who had just been using her address for mail fraud.
It's terrifying, and it proves a fundamental point. When you deliberately strip judicial discretion away from enforcement, you do not get precision. You get collateral damage, plain and simple.
Section 5. Institutional double standards. Protecting the machine. Let's talk about this $17 million figure. This is the total payout from a taxpayer-funded slush fund that was created by the 1995 Congressional Accountability Act.
Yeah, and get this, it was loudly celebrated as a reform, but in reality, it allowed members of Congress to pay off harassment victims in total secrecy, seal the records permanently, and just stay in office like nothing happened. The law literally institutionalized protection for powerful elected officials.
Which naturally brings us to the ultimate double standard surrounding the president himself. You've got dismissed assault and harassment allegations from women like Paula Jones and Juanita Broderick. You've got 26 separate flight legs on Jeffrey Epstein's planes. Not to mention that closed-door testimony from February 2026 where the former president claimed he saw nothing. He was impeached for federal crimes, but acquitted. It's a dark Teflon legacy, and the lesson is loud and clear. If your party holds the line, federal crimes simply do not matter. Finally, Section 6. The bill comes due, paying for the smile. So, stepping back, what does this entire article reveal about memory, propaganda, and political branding? It shows this insane contrast between what we collectively remember and what we actually got. Culturally, we remember the saxophone. We remember the Arsenio Hall appearance, the cool vibe, the temporary surplus. But what we got was the groundwork for the 2008 financial crash. We got 42.8 million Americans shackled by student debt, and we got deep, systemic institutional decay. Millennials and Gen Z are out there right now, still actively paying for a bipartisan machine that was built using the language of progress and hope.
He made the machine smile. But who is still paying the bill? That's the uncompromising takeaway from Vivify Mariposa's investigative autopsy. Clinton did not stop the machine. He just made it smile. And America is definitely still paying the bill today. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. Keep questioning the math, and we'll see you next time.